When I first met Catherine, it felt like a lifeline had been thrown into the churning sea of my grief. I was 48 years old at the time, and I had spent years trying to put myself back together after losing Linda, my first wife. Linda had died suddenly during childbirth, and though people always say time heals all wounds, that one felt like it would never close. The baby didn't survive either. So there I was, left with nothing but a deafening silence where laughter and love used to be. It was like someone had pressed mute on my entire world. In those dark years, I learned how deep loneliness can burrow into a man's soul. I threw myself into work because work didn't ask questions. Work didn't wonder why I wasn't over it yet. But outside the office, everything felt hollow. I'd come home to an empty house, sit at the kitchen table, and stare at the plate of food I barely touched. Holidays were the worst. Empty chairs, memories I couldn't bear to revisit, and no one to share even a simple conversation with. It wasn't living, not really. Then Catherine came into my life. We met through a mutual friend at a dinner party. She wasn't flashy or larger than life like Linda had been. No, Catherine was steady. She was kind, the kind of person who could make small talk feel meaningful. She asked about me, not out of politeness, but because she genuinely cared to hear the answer. I remember noticing how her eyes softened when I told her about Linda. There was no pity, just understanding. Catherine was 55 then, 7 years older than me, and I think that groundedness came with her age. She didn't try to be something she wasn't. She wasn't about drama or whirlwind romances. She was practical, level-headed, the kind of woman who made life feel manageable. And after all the chaos and heartbreak, that stability was what I needed. I didn't need someone to fix me. I needed someone who could sit with me in the quiet and not be scared of it. When we got married a year later, it wasn't some big, passionate affair. It wasn't the kind of love that swept you off your feet. But it was good. Catherine was good. She brought a sense of order back into my life, like a warm cup of coffee on a cold morning. We settled into a routine easily. She enjoyed gardening, and I helped her build raised beds in the backyard. She liked puzzles and crosswords, and I'd sit with her on the couch, pretending to help but mostly just enjoying the companionship. Still, there was a part of me, one I tried not to acknowledge too often, that sometimes felt restless. Our life together was steady, yes, but it lacked a certain spark. With Linda, everything had felt electric, fiery arguments, passionate reconciliations, a constant buzz of energy in the air. Catherine wasn't like that. She didn't challenge me or push me outside my comfort zone. And for the most part, I told myself that was okay. I had loved wildly once, and it had nearly destroyed me. Maybe what I needed now was something calmer, something safe. But the truth is, there were nights when I'd sit alone in the backyard after Catherine had gone to bed and feel this ache deep in my chest. Like something was missing, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I never told her about that. How could I? How do you admit that the life you've built together, a life that works on paper, still feels like it's missing something vital? So we carried on. We spent nearly a decade together, building a life that was solid and reliable. Catherine wasn't just my wife. She became my partner in every sense of the word. We shared everything. Our finances, our daily routines, our little inside jokes. It wasn't a love story that people write songs about, but it worked for us. Or at least I thought it did. It wasn't until that one vacation, just a short trip meant to give me some time to myself, that everything changed. That trip didn't just disrupt the quiet little life Catherine and I had built together. It shattered it. And though I didn't know it at the time, it would set me on a path I'd never be able to walk back from. The trip to Mexico was supposed to be nothing more than a short escape. Catherine had been the one to suggest it. "You've been working so hard. You deserve a break," she said, her voice gentle but insistent. "Just a week by yourself to recharge." She had work commitments and couldn't come along, and she was always so pragmatic about things. I resisted at first. It felt selfish to go without her, but she kept pushing. "You'll come back feeling refreshed," she said one evening as she folded laundry. "And you'll be a lot better company than you've been lately." She said it with a teasing smile, but there was a hint of truth beneath the humor. I had been distant. Maybe I did need the time. So, with her blessing, I booked a room at a luxury resort perched on the cliffs of a quiet Mexican seaside town. From the moment I arrived, I could feel the tension slipping from my shoulders. The air smelled like salt and tropical flowers, and the sound of the waves crashing below seemed to wash away the noise in my head. The hotel itself was exquisite. Marble floors, sparkling pools that stretched out toward the horizon, and balconies with views that could take your breath away. I spent my first few days indulging in all the clichés of a solo vacation. Lazy mornings with strong coffee, afternoons reading by the pool, and dinners at the open-air restaurant where the sea breeze played with the edges of the tablecloth. It was a kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving. And yet, as relaxing as it was, there was an undercurrent of restlessness I couldn't quite shake. By the third day, I found myself wandering into the hotel's spa. It was an impulse decision. I hadn't planned on booking a massage, but something about the space called to me. The warm, low-lit room smelled of eucalyptus and lavender, and the receptionist welcomed me with a serene smile. That's when I met her. Chelsea was one of the massage therapists on staff. She introduced herself with an easy confidence that caught me off guard, her hand lingering just a second too long in mine as she shook it. She was blonde, vibrant, and probably half my age. Her eyes were the kind of bright, piercing blue you didn't forget, and her laugh was soft but infectious. She seemed to radiate a kind of youthful energy I hadn't been around in years. The first session was exactly what I'd asked for, a standard massage. But even as she worked, her hands moving expertly over my back and shoulders, there was something in the air. Her touch lingered, her voice warm and conversational. She asked about my life back home, where I was from, and how I was enjoying my stay. I told her about Catherine, how we'd been married for years, and her response was a subtle smile, almost playful. "Sounds like you've got a good life," she said, her tone light but somehow loaded. I left the spa that day feeling oddly unsettled. I told myself it was nothing, just a bit of friendly banter, but her smile stayed with me. The next day, I found myself back in the spa lobby, signing up for another session. My back didn't hurt. I wasn't sore. I just wanted to see her again. This time, the conversation flowed more easily, the tension between us harder to ignore. She teased me about my tan lines, her fingers brushing my shoulder just a little more intimately than necessary. "You should spend more time in the sun," she joked. "Get some color while you're here." It became a routine over the next few days. I'd schedule a massage in the morning, and by the time the session ended, I'd already be thinking about the next one. Chelsea and I fell into an easy rhythm of flirtation, subtle at first, then more daring. She started calling me by my first name, her tone soft and familiar. The boundary between professional and personal blurred until it vanished completely. By the end of the week, it wasn't just about massages anymore. One afternoon, as the session ended and she leaned down to whisper something about my tight shoulders, I kissed her. It was impulsive, reckless, but the moment our lips met, any sense of guilt or hesitation dissolved. We crossed that line together, and there was no going back. Chelsea and I fell into a whirlwind affair that week, our time together as fleeting and intoxicating as the ocean breeze. She made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, desire, yes, but also youth, spontaneity, and a dangerous kind of freedom. I didn't think about Catherine. I didn't think about anything beyond the way Chelsea's laugh lit up the room or the way her hands felt on my skin. When the week ended, leaving felt strangely surreal. Chelsea kissed me on the cheek outside the spa, her hand lingering on my arm. "Take care of yourself," she said, her smile as radiant as ever. I returned home to Catherine, who greeted me at the door with her usual warmth. She wrapped her arms around me, kissed my cheek, and asked, "How was your trip?" "It was great," I said, my voice steady despite the guilt gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I described the resort, the food, the views. And, of course, I mentioned the spa, keeping my tone light and casual. Her eyes lit up as I spoke. "It sounds amazing," she said, her smile genuine. "Maybe we should go there together next time." The suggestion caught me off guard. My heart skipped a beat, but I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah," I said. "You'd love it." I never imagined she'd actually take me up on the idea. I didn't think much of it when Catherine told me she had decided to visit the resort. She stood in our bedroom, her suitcase laid open on the bed, carefully folding her favorite sun hat and tucking it into the corner. "I need a break too," she said, her voice calm but determined. "And since you liked it so much, I thought I'd try it out." The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut, but I forced a smile, leaning against the doorframe as I watched her pack. "That's a great idea," I said, trying to sound supportive. "You'll love it there." Deep down, though, my mind raced with questions I didn't dare voice. Would Chelsea recognize her? Would the staff say anything? No, I told myself firmly. There was no way. Chelsea wasn't the type to stir up trouble, and the hotel staff were professionals. I convinced myself that everything would be fine. The next morning, I drove Catherine to the airport. As I unloaded her suitcase from the trunk, she turned to me with that warm smile of hers. The smile I didn't deserve. "Try not to work too hard while I'm gone," she said, placing a hand on my arm. I kissed her goodbye, feeling the weight of my own guilt settle heavily in my chest. As I watched her walk into the terminal, I couldn't help but wonder if she'd come back the same. But I brushed the thought away, telling myself it was paranoia. When Catherine arrived at the resort, she was immediately swept into the kind of luxury that had left me so dazzled during my own stay. The staff welcomed her warmly, their professionalism impeccable. Her room was just as stunning as mine had been, with its balcony overlooking the endless turquoise sea. She fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next couple of days, mirroring the same routine I'd had just a week before. Mornings were spent walking along the beach, the waves lapping at her feet as she enjoyed the crisp ocean breeze. Afternoons were for leisurely meals by the pool, where waiters brought her tropical cocktails and plates of fresh seafood. The peace and quiet were exactly what she'd hoped for. But on her third day, Catherine decided to visit the spa. It seemed like a natural choice. After all, I had raved about it when I returned home. She was eager to see what had impressed me so much. The spa was just as serene as I had described, with its soft lighting, soothing music, and the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. After her treatment, a relaxing facial, Catherine decided to linger in the lounge area, sipping a glass of cucumber-infused water as she flipped through a magazine. The atmosphere was peaceful, but her attention was drawn to a conversation happening a few chairs away. Two spa employees were talking in hushed tones, their voices carrying just enough for her to catch snippets of their exchange. She wasn't eavesdropping at first, but then a name caught her attention. "Chelsea," one of them said, laughing softly. "She's got quite a reputation with some of the guests, doesn't she?" The other one snickered. "Yeah, especially that American guy last week. What was his name again?" "Oh right, Michael. She really worked her magic on him." Catherine froze. Her glass of water hovered halfway to her lips, her mind reeling. Michael? Her Michael? She forced herself to stay calm, her heart pounding in her chest as the employees continued their conversation, oblivious to her presence. Apparently, she knew all kinds of details about him, his wife, his life back home, the first one said. "Guess he must have been pretty comfortable with her." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. She set her glass down carefully, her hands trembling as a cold wave of realization washed over her. Who was Chelsea? What kind of magic had she worked on her husband? And why did she know personal details about their life? Unable to ignore the nagging questions, Catherine decided to investigate. She started with the spa receptionist, casually asking if Chelsea was available for a treatment. When the receptionist informed her that Chelsea wasn't on shift that day, Catherine pressed further, asking if Chelsea was well known among the staff. "She's one of our most requested therapists," the receptionist said with a polite smile. "Guests just love her." Catherine nodded, her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. Over the next day, she began piecing together fragments of conversations and observations. She overheard more staff members mentioning Chelsea in passing, each comment adding another piece to the puzzle. By the fourth day, Catherine had heard enough to confirm her worst suspicions. Chelsea hadn't just given Michael a massage. She had given him her undivided attention, and more. But what broke Catherine wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the way Chelsea seemed to know so much about her life, as if Michael had shared the most intimate details of their marriage with a stranger. The thought of it made her stomach churn. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice as the truth settled over her. Michael had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Not just physically but emotionally, too. That night, as she sat alone on the balcony of her hotel room, Catherine stared out at the dark ocean, her mind a storm of pain and anger. She clutched her chest as her breathing grew shallow, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on her like a tidal wave. Michael had always been her partner, the one person she thought she could rely on. And now, everything she had believed about their life together felt like a lie. When Catherine walked through the door that evening, I noticed immediately that something was off. She looked different. Not in a way you could pinpoint easily, but it was there in the way she moved, in the heaviness of her steps, and the lack of warmth in her eyes. Her usual energy, the quiet confidence that always defined her, seemed to have drained away. "Welcome home," I said, stepping toward her with an easy smile, though I felt my nerves tighten the moment I saw her face. I leaned in to kiss her cheek, but she turned her head ever so slightly, so my lips brushed the air. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the feeling aside. "How was your trip?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and casual. My words hung in the air, waiting. Catherine slipped her coat off and hung it by the door with deliberate slowness. "The hotel was beautiful," she said finally, her voice calm but strange. There was something restrained about it, something measured, as though she had rehearsed the words. "I can see why you liked it so much." I nodded, forcing a smile, but guilt pricked at me like tiny needles under my skin. Her tone didn't match her words. There was a sharpness, an edge that was impossible to miss. "That's great," I said, trying to steer the conversation into safer territory. "Did you get to relax?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her suitcase and carried it toward the bedroom without looking back. "I'm exhausted," she said over her shoulder. "Let's talk later." I watched her disappear down the hallway, the unease in my chest growing heavier by the second. Something wasn't right, but I told myself it was just fatigue, maybe a rough travel day. She'd open up later once she'd had some rest. But later came and things didn't get better. That night we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The room was quiet except for the occasional clink of silverware on porcelain. Normally, Catherine liked to chat during dinner, about her garden, her work, something she'd read. But tonight, she barely touched her food, and the silence between us felt oppressive. Finally, I cleared my throat. "You didn't say much about your trip," I said, trying to sound casual. "What was your favorite part?" Catherine set her fork down carefully, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at her plate, as if trying to decide whether to speak at all. Then she looked up at me, her face pale and her eyes brimming with something raw. "Who is Chelsea?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a thunderclap. My fork froze midair, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, my mind racing to find a way out. Don't lie to me, Michael," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "She knows about us, about me, about everything." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The silence that followed was unbearable, a vacuum that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Catherine's gaze bore into me, filled with equal parts pain and fury. Slowly, I set my fork down, my hands trembling. "Catherine," I started, my voice hoarse. "I can explain." But there was no explaining this. No excuse would undo what I had done. And so, haltingly, painfully, I began to tell her the truth. Every word felt like a hammer blow, each confession shattering what little trust remained between us. I couldn't even look her in the eye. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down her face. Her hands were clenched into fists on the table, her knuckles white. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How could you do this to me?" "I'm sorry," I said, the words spilling out in desperation. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything. It wasn't about you. Please, you have to believe me. She let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and cutting. It wasn't about me? She repeated, her voice rising. Then why did you tell her about me, Michael? Why did you share details about our life? About me? With her? I had no answer. The truth was, I hadn't thought about the consequences when I told Chelsea those small, intimate details. In the moment it had felt harmless, flattering, even. But now, faced with Catherine's anguish, I saw how deeply I had betrayed her. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor as she clutched her chest. You've destroyed everything, she said, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Catherine! I rushed to her side, panic surging through me. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she struggled to breathe. Catherine, please sit down. Let me help you. But it was too late. Her body swayed, and she collapsed into my arms, her weight heavy and unresponsive. Catherine! I shouted, my voice cracking as I lowered her gently to the floor. Her eyes fluttered closed, her breaths shallow and uneven. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. As I waited for the paramedics, I held her hand tightly, whispering apologies over and over again. I'm sorry, Catherine, I said, tears streaming down my face. Please hold on. Please don't leave me. But in the back of my mind, I knew the damage was already done. Catherine passed away 2 days after that night, and I'll never forget the moment the doctor told me. I was sitting in the stark white hospital waiting room, my hands clasped tightly together, staring at the linoleum floor. A nurse walked in first, her face soft with sympathy, and I already knew what she was going to say before the words left her mouth. It was a heart attack, the doctor said when he came in moments later, his voice clinical, almost detached. We did everything we could. He paused, his eyes flickering with something like pity. I'm sorry for your loss. But what he didn't say, and what I couldn't ignore, was that it wasn't just a heart attack that took her. It wasn't random or unavoidable. No, it was me. It was my betrayal, my selfishness, my weakness. The weight of that truth hit me harder than any blow I'd ever taken. I stayed at the hospital long after they let me see her. She looked so peaceful lying there, almost as though she were just sleeping. But the stillness of her chest, the coldness of her hands, there was no escaping the reality of it. Catherine was gone, and I was the reason why. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like a tide rising around my ankles. At first, I told myself it was grief, that it would fade with time. But grief didn't explain the way my chest tightened every time I walked past her favorite chair, or how I couldn't bring myself to eat breakfast at the table we'd shared for years. It didn't explain the nightmares, visions of her face, pale and stricken, her last words echoing in my ears. You've destroyed everything. Now every morning I visit her grave. It's become a ritual, a small semblance of routine in the hollow shell my life has become. Rain or shine, I'm there before the sun fully rises, the damp morning air clinging to my skin as I kneel in the grass. The headstone is simple, just like Catherine would have wanted. Her name, her dates, and the words, beloved wife. I always bring flowers. She loved daisies, so I try to find fresh ones at the market, but sometimes it's roses or tulips or whatever I can get my hands on. I arrange them carefully at the base of the stone, making sure they look just right. And then I sit there, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves or the occasional chirp of a bird. I'm sorry, Catherine, I whisper, my voice cracking every time, for everything. I'm so sorry. But the words feel empty. They don't change anything. They don't bring her back or undo what I've done. All they do is echo back at me, a reminder of how little I have left to offer her. The house we shared feels like a mausoleum now. Her absence is everywhere, in everything. The creak of the floorboards doesn't carry the same warmth it used to when she'd move about the house. The smell of her favorite lavender soap has long since faded from the bathroom. Even her garden, the one she loved so much, has started to wilt. I try to tend to it, but I don't have her touch. I thought about selling the house, starting over somewhere new. But the truth is, I don't deserve a fresh start. This house, this life is my penance. It's a constant reminder of the life we built together and how carelessly I tore it apart. As for Chelsea, I haven't thought about her since. Or rather, I've tried not to. She was a fleeting moment of selfish desire, a mistake I'll regret until my dying breath. I can barely picture her face now. It's faded into the fog of my shame. She wasn't the problem, not really. She was just a mirror, reflecting the emptiness I'd been too cowardly to confront. I think back to the life Catherine and I had before the trip, and I wonder how I could have been so blind. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fiery or passionate, but it was real. It was solid. And now it's gone, all because I couldn't see the value of what I had until it was too late. There's a heaviness in me now, a weight that I carry every second of every day. It's not just guilt. It's regret, shame, and the unbearable ache of knowing I can never make things right. I can't bring her back. I can't erase the hurt I caused. All I can do is live with it. Sometimes, when I'm at her grave, I imagine what she'd say if she could see me now. Would she forgive me? Would she tell me to move on, to find some shred of happiness again? Or would she turn away, unable to bear the sight of the man who destroyed her? I'll never know. All I have now is the memory of her, the way she smiled when she worked in her garden, the sound of her laugh when I made one of my bad jokes, the warmth of her hand in mine on those quiet evenings by the fire. And all I have left to give her are these flowers, this time at her grave, and these whispered apologies that will never be enough. Regret isn't just a feeling. It's a companion, one that follows you everywhere. It doesn't let you forget. It doesn't let you heal. It's there when I wake up in the morning and when I close my eyes at night. And I know it will follow me to my own grave.